He escaped with a psychiatric patient. 7 days later, love healed them both. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please take a second to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you will never miss our newest dramatic stories. It is completely free, and it truly helps us keep bringing you heartfelt tales of redemption, kindness, and love. Your support means more to us than you can imagine. Now, imagine this for a moment. A quiet psychiatric hospital at midnight. The lights buzz softly. A man mops the empty hallway. A man who once had everything: wealth, freedom, and pride, but lost it all. His name is Jay Wheeler. And tonight, when a barefoot girl steps out of her room and quietly follows him into the elevator, Jay's broken life is about to change forever. Now, let us return to our main character. Jay moved the mop across the long hospital corridor, his reflection ghost-like on the polished floor. The sound of the water bucket rolling behind him was the only rhythm in a place built to silence pain. He kept his eyes down, counting the tiles, pretending not to notice the locked doors lining the hallway, each one hiding a different story of fear, confusion, or forgotten hope. Once, Jay had lived in a very different world: high-rise apartments, expensive suits, and nights filled with people who called him brilliant until he fell. A single reckless decision had cost him everything: his job, his father's trust, and his freedom. Now, community service in a psychiatric hospital was all that stood between him and jail. He told himself he did not care anymore. Caring had become dangerous. It meant feeling, and feeling meant pain. But that night, the stillness was broken by a sound so soft it almost did not exist: the faint click of a door opening behind him. Jay turned, expecting to see one of the nurses. Instead, a young woman stood there, barefoot, her hospital gown brushing the floor. Her hair was tangled, her eyes unfocused yet strangely calm. She looked no older than 25. She did not move, did not speak. She simply watched him, tilting her head slightly as if trying to remember how to speak to another person. Jay frowned and said quietly, "You are not supposed to be out here." The girl blinked, taking one slow step forward. Her voice was almost a whisper. "You are cleaning." Jay nodded, unsure what else to say. "Yes, I am cleaning. You should go back to your room." But she did not. She walked closer, studying him with open curiosity, like a child seeing rain for the first time. There was no fear in her eyes, only wonder. Her presence unsettled him, not because she was strange, but because she seemed untouched by the hardness of the world he knew too well. He glanced down the hall, expecting security to appear. No one came. For a moment, it was just the two of them, a man who had lost faith in himself, and a woman who barely knew what the world was. Jay sighed, ready to guide her back when she softly asked, "What is your name?" He hesitated. "Jay." "Jept?" Her lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. "Jay." She repeated it as if tasting the word for the first time. Then she looked at him again and said, "Are you going home?" The question caught him off guard. He had not heard the word home in years without bitterness. "No," he replied. "I do not have one." She tilted her head. "Everyone has a home. Maybe you just forgot where it is." He felt something shift inside him, a flicker of warmth he thought had died long ago. Before he could respond, she turned toward the elevator at the end of the hall. The soft ding echoed through the silence as the doors opened. Jay called out, "Wait, you cannot go there." But she stepped inside, unafraid, turning to face him. Her calm expression disarmed him completely. For a reason he could not explain, he followed her. The doors closed. The air was heavy with the hum of the elevator motor. Jay's pulse slowed, matching the rhythm of her quiet breathing beside him. She looked up at him and whispered, "I want to go where you are going." He stared at the glowing floor numbers, unable to answer. When the doors opened again, the night air rushed in cold, damp, alive. The sound of rain filled the silence. Daisy stepped out first, her bare feet meeting the wet pavement. Jay stood frozen, the mop handle still in his hand. Something deep in his chest told him that his life had just crossed an invisible line, that from this moment forward, nothing would ever be the same. Rain tapped softly against the windshield as Jay drove down the dark highway. The hospital was miles behind him now, but the weight of what had just happened pressed on his chest like a stone. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles pale in the dim glow of the dashboard. The wipers brushed back and forth in a steady rhythm, the only sound inside the truck. Next to him, Daisy sat quietly in the passenger seat. Her bare feet were tucked beneath her hospital gown, and her eyes were fixed on the passing lights outside. She did not speak. She seemed completely calm, almost peaceful, as if this late-night escape was not strange at all. Jay cleared his throat, his voice rough from the tension. "You should not be here. You cannot just walk out of a hospital like that." Daisy turned her head slowly, studying his face as if trying to decide whether he meant harm. "I wanted to see the world," she said softly. "I have never seen it at night." He let out a short breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You picked the wrong guy for a field trip." For a few miles, neither of them spoke. The highway stretched endlessly through the Louisiana countryside. The smell of rain mixed with the faint scent of disinfectant still clinging to Daisy's gown. Jay knew he should turn around, bring her back, and face the consequences. But when he glanced at her again, she was leaning her head against the window, watching the droplets race each other down the glass. Something about her quiet innocence kept him from doing it. He told himself it was only for one night. He would let her see the world, then take her back in the morning. One night would not ruin his life any more than it already was. After a while, Daisy broke the silence. "Where are you going?" Jay kept his eyes on the road. "Home. At least what used to be home." She nodded thoughtfully, as if she understood more than he expected. "Will it be warm there?" Jay hesitated. "Maybe. It has been a long time." The truth was, he had not been back to his mother's old farmhouse in years. After she died, the place had fallen apart, just like everything else in his life. Still, it was the only place he could think of to hide for the night. By the time they reached the edge of the small town where he had grown up, dawn was beginning to color the horizon in pale blue. Jay parked the truck by a line of oak trees and turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. Daisy looked around, her expression soft with wonder. "It smells like rain and grass," she whispered. "It smells free." Jay stepped out and walked toward the front porch. The wood creaked under his boots. The house looked smaller than he remembered, shutters hanging loose, vines curling up the sides. He turned back and saw Daisy still sitting in the truck, hesitant. He gestured for her to come out. "It is all right. No one is here." She climbed out, her bare feet landing on the wet ground. She tilted her head back and closed her eyes as the morning air touched her face. Jay watched her and felt something shift, a strange mix of guilt and peace. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of dust. Jay found an old blanket and handed it to her. "You can rest here for a while. Tomorrow, I will take you back." Daisy nodded and sat on the worn sofa, wrapping the blanket around her shoulders. "You do not have to take me back if you do not want to." Jay froze. "You do not understand. I have to. It is the right thing to do." "Lonkai." She met his eyes, her tone gentle but certain. "Sometimes the right thing is not what people tell you. Sometimes it is what feels true." Her words landed deeper than she could have known. Jay looked at her, this fragile, barefoot girl who had followed him without fear, and felt the old walls inside him begin to crack. For the first time in years, he wondered if redemption was not about punishment, but about mercy. He turned away, muttering, "Get some rest." But even as he said it, he knew sleep would not come easily. The rain had stopped, but in the silence that followed, something else had begun. A quiet connection neither of them understood yet, but both could feel growing between them like the first light of morning. The morning light filtered through the broken blinds, painting pale lines across the dusty living room. Jay sat on the edge of an old chair, elbows on his knees, watching Daisy sleep on the sofa. Her breathing was steady, peaceful, almost childlike. She had pulled the blanket up to her chin, her bare feet sticking out at the end, still covered in faint specks of dirt from the night before. For a long time, Jay did not move. He could not remember the last time he had seen someone look so calm, so untouched by the chaos of the world. His mind should have been racing about the hospital, the police, his probation officer, but instead, there was only quiet. When Daisy stirred, stretching slightly, Jay spoke without looking at her. "You should eat something. There might be cereal in the cabinet if the mice have not taken it." She sat up slowly, blinking against the sunlight. "You live here?" Jay shook his head. "Used to. It was my mother's house. She passed away a few years ago." Daisy's gaze softened. "I am sorry." He shrugged, pretending it did not matter. "Do not be. She was sick for a long time. I was not here when it happened." "Dam no." That silence hung heavy between them. Daisy looked down, then reached for a chipped mug on the table. "Was she kind?" Jay nodded. "Yes. Too kind. That was her problem." Daisy smiled faintly, as if she understood something in those words. Then she asked, "Do you miss her?" He stared at the floor. "Every day." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of birds outside filled the empty house, mingling with the faint hum of the refrigerator that somehow still worked. Finally, Jay stood and walked to the window. "You cannot stay here forever. I will take you back to the hospital later today." Daisy's expression changed. Her smile faded, replaced by quiet fear. "You promised to show me the world," she said softly. He frowned. "I never promised that." "Yes, you did," she insisted. "When I asked if you were going home, you said yes. You said I could come." Jay turned, frustrated by her simplicity but also by how innocent she sounded. "That was not a promise. I was trying to help you calm down." She lowered her gaze, her voice almost a whisper. "Then let me see a little more before we go back. Just today." Jay wanted to say no. Every logical thought screamed for him to take her back immediately. But when he looked at her, sitting there in the soft morning light, clutching the blanket like a fragile shield, he could not bring himself to end it. "One day," he said finally, "we will drive around and then I will bring you back. You have my word." Her face lit up, pure and genuine. "A promise?" Jay hesitated, then nodded. "A promise." That one word settled between them like something sacred. Daisy rose from the sofa and stepped toward the window, the light catching her hair. "Where will we go?" He forced a small smile. "We will see what is still standing in this town." Donghaiju. By noon, they were back in the truck, driving down the narrow road that cut through the fields. Daisy leaned out slightly, letting the wind lift her hair. Every sign, every old mailbox, every rusted tractor drew her curiosity. She asked questions about everything who lived there, what people did, why the world smelled different outside the hospital. Jay answered some, ignored others, but inside he felt something unfamiliar. The slow return of life. The heaviness in his chest eased each time she laughed at something small. A stray dog running across the road. The way the clouds changed shape. They stopped at a small diner on the edge of town. Daisy pressed her nose to the window, marveling at the smell of frying bacon and coffee. Jay bought her pancakes with the few dollars he had left. She ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was the first real meal she had ever tasted. Watching her, Jay could not help but smile. There was something humbling about the way she found beauty in things he had long stopped noticing. When they left, Daisy reached into her hospital gown pocket and pulled out something small. A paper napkin folded carefully. A tiny drawing of two stick figures holding hands under a Sunday. "I drew this last night," she said. "It is us." Jay looked at it and felt the weight of his Conde promise. He had meant it to buy time, but now it felt real, like a thread he could not break. As the sun dipped behind the trees, he glanced at her, still watching the world as if seeing magic in every shadow. And somewhere deep inside, Jay Wheeler began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was the one thing in his broken life that was still pure enough to believe in. The morning mist was lifting as Jay's truck rolled down the narrow country road, its tires crunching against gravel still wet from last night's rain. The sky stretched wide and pale, and the world smelled of pine, earth, and promise. Daisy leaned her head out the open window, her hair blowing in the wind, her eyes bright with wonder. Every few minutes she would point at something, a cow grazing behind a fence, an old church steeple, a mailbox shaped like a cat, and ask questions that no one else would bother to ask. Jay answered in short, gruff sentences, but there was warmth in his voice now, a tone that had not existed in years. He had told himself he was just honoring his promise one day of freedom before he took her back. But with every mile, the thought of the hospital began to feel more distant, like a life he no longer belonged to. They stopped at a gas station just outside the town limits. Jay filled the tank while Daisy wandered toward the vending machines, barefoot as always, studying each button as if it were a puzzle. A little boy nearby stared at her with wide eyes, tugging on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, why is that lady not wearing shoes?" His mother smiled awkwardly and hurried him away, but Daisy just smiled at the child and pressed her hands to the glass of the machine. "So many colors," she said when Jay came over. "How do you choose?" Jay dropped a few coins into the slot and pressed the button for a cola. The can clattered down. He handed it to her. "Like that. You just pick one." She held the can with both hands, watching the condensation form on the metal. "Cold," she whispered, amazed. Then, slowly, she opened it. The fizz made her jump. She laughed, the sound light and unguarded. Jay found himself laughing too, quietly at first, then louder than he meant to. It startled him. He could not remember the last time laughter had felt natural. They drove again, this time toward the lake on the edge of town. The road wound through trees, sunlight flickering between the branches. Daisy hummed softly to herself, a tune without words. Jay listened. The sound was calming, almost sacred. When they reached the lake, the surface shimmered under the mid-morning sunday. Daisy stepped out of the truck, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft dirt. "It is beautiful," she said simply. Jay sat on the hood, arms crossed, watching her walk toward the water. She crouched at the edge, letting her fingers touch the surface. "It moves even when the wind stops," she murmured. Jay nodded. "That is what water does. It never stays still." "Like—" She turned to him, eyes thoughtful. "Are people like that too?" He paused before answering. "Some are. Others build walls to keep from moving." Daisy smiled gently. "You built one too." Jay looked away, the truth of her words cutting deeper than he expected. "Maybe I did." They stayed there until the sky began to turn gold. Daisy gathered small stones and arranged them in a line by the water, humming again. Jay skipped one across the surface, watching the ripples spread. As the afternoon faded, they stopped by a roadside diner for lunch. Daisy pressed her face against the glass, watching people laugh inside. Jay hesitated, unsure if bringing her in would cause trouble, but the waitress smiled and waved them to a booth. The smell of bacon, coffee, and old jukebox music filled the air. Daisy looked at everything with quiet awe: the menu, the syrup bottles, the spinning pie case. When the food came, she folded her hands before eating, eyes closed, as if saying a silent prayer. Jay watched her carefully cut a pancake into perfect squares. He said softly, "You act like everything is new." She looked up at him. "It is. When you spend your life behind walls, even air feels new when it moves." Her words stayed with him long after they finished eating. Back in the truck, he glanced at her reflection in the side mirror. She was watching the sky again, tracing shapes in the clouds. That evening, they returned to the farmhouse. The sun was setting, painting the porch in orange light. Daisy sat on the steps, hugging her knees, and said, "Thank you for today." Jay leaned against the railing. "Do not thank me. You just wanted to see the world." She looked up at him, her expression soft and serious. "You showed it to me?" The simplicity of that sentence silenced him. Jay had spent years trying to fix his life through apologies and excuses, but somehow this fragile woman who had nothing had managed to give him something he had lost entirely: the feeling of being seen. As the first stars appeared above the fields, Jay realized that his one-day promise was already slipping away. The road, the laughter, the light in her eyes, they had all become part of something larger than the plan he had made. He should have been afraid of what would happen next, but for the first time in years, fear did not lead him. Hope did. The day had faded into a quiet evening, and the fields around the farmhouse glowed faintly under the last trace of sunlight. The air smelled of wet grass and wood smoke from a distant chimney. Jay stood by the window, his hands resting on the old sill, watching the horizon turn from gold to blue. He heard soft footsteps behind him and turned to see Daisy, barefoot as always, walking toward him with a curious look. "It is beautiful here," she said, her voice almost a whisper. Jay nodded. "It used to be. When I was a kid, I thought this place was magic. Then I grew up and realized it was just another house falling apart." Daisy tilted her head, studying him. "It does not look broken to me." He gave a small, tired laugh. "That is because you do not know what it used to be." "Gomai." She walked past him and opened the door. The night air drifted in, cool and alive. "Maybe it does not matter what it was," she said. "Maybe it only matters what it is right now." Jay followed her outside. The porch boards creaked under their weight. The fields stretched endlessly under the wide sky, and the first fireflies had begun to appear, flickering like tiny floating stars. Daisy gasped softly and stepped off the porch. "They look like light that forgot to stay in the sky," she whispered. Jay watched her move through the tall grass, her white gown glowing faintly in the dark. She reached out, cupping her hands around the air, trying to catch the little sparks of light. Her laughter carried across the field, bright and unguarded. It had been years since Jay had heard a sound that pure. He found himself walking toward her, the damp ground soft under his boots. "You will not catch them," he said. She turned to him, eyes shining. "Maybe I am not supposed to. Maybe I am only supposed to watch." Her words settled in the air like something fragile and true. Jay stopped beside her, both of them looking up as more fireflies appeared, until the field shimmered like a dream. Daisy glanced at him. "You are smiling," she said softly. He touched his face, almost surprised. "I guess I am. But you look sad when you do," she added, not unkindly. Jay looked at her, the honesty in her voice cutting through the walls he had built. "Maybe that is just how I am." She shook her head gently. "No, that is how you were." The night grew cooler. They sat on the grass, the farmhouse glowing faintly behind them. Jay picked up a small stick and began tracing circles in the dirt. Daisy lay back, watching the stars. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked. He sighed. "I used to." "Not anymore." Yawning said. "Why?" "Because every time I did, I made a mess of it." Daisy smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the sky. "Then stop thinking about next. Think about now." Jay turned to her, the fireflies reflected in her eyes. "You talk like you have everything figured out." She shook her head. "No. I just know that sometimes broken things can still shine." They stayed there in silence. The sound of crickets filled the night, steady and calm. Jay could feel something shifting inside him. Not a rush of excitement, but a slow thawing, the way frost melts when touched by morning light. When Daisy shivered, he took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. She looked down at it, then up at him. "You will be cold," she said. "I have been cold for years," he replied softly. "This is different." She smiled, holding the jacket close. "Then maybe you are learning to feel warm again." Jay watched her for a long time, memorizing the quiet light of the fireflies around them. The world felt small but alive, fragile yet safe. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a man being punished. He felt like a man being forgiven. The night stretched on, full of soft sounds and flickering lights. And though Jay did not know what tomorrow would bring, he knew one thing for certain. Somewhere between the silence and the laughter, between the guilt and the kindness, something inside him had begun to heal. The sun rose quietly over the fields, turning the farmhouse into a soft silhouette against the morning sky. Jay was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. He had barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Daisy's face in the glow of the fireflies, her words echoing in his mind. Sometimes broken things can still shine. He wanted to believe her. For a few hours he had. But the light of morning had a way of breaking illusions. He knew what they had done could not last. There were rules, there were laws, and both of them had crossed lines that could not be ignored. Daisy appeared in the doorway, his jacket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was a little messy, her eyes soft from sleep. "Good morning," she said quietly. Jay tried to smile. "Morning. Did you sleep well?" "Yes," she said. "It was the first night I was not afraid." He looked down at his coffee. The warmth of her words made it harder to do what he knew he had to do. "We should leave soon," he said. "I need to take you back." Daisy frowned. "Back where?" "The hospital," he said slowly. "They will be looking for you, for both of us." She shook her head. "I do not want to go back." Jay's chest tightened. "You do not understand. If I do not take you, I could go to prison. I am already on probation. I cannot run from this." Her voice trembled, but she spoke with quiet certainty. "You are not running. You are helping me. That is not wrong." Before Jay could respond, the distant sound of engines broke through the morning stillness. He stood quickly, moving to the window. A cloud of dust rose on the dirt road leading to the house. 2 police cars and a white van with the hospital's logo were approaching fast. Daisy moved beside him, her face pale. "They found us," she whispered. Jay's pulse quickened. He had known this moment would come, but it still felt like being punched in the chest. "Stay here," he said, grabbing his keys. "I will talk to them." He stepped outside as the vehicles pulled up. Officers stepped out, followed by a man in a gray suit, the hospital's director. Behind him came a woman Jay recognized immediately, his mother's friend, the one who had visited him in jail years ago. Her expression was sharp, disappointed. "Jay Wheeler," the director called out. "Step away from the house. The patient you removed belongs in our care." Jay lifted his hand slightly. "I did not remove her. She followed me." "That is not how it looks," the man replied coldly. "You violated your probation and interfered with a medical facility. Do you have any idea what that means?" Before Jay could answer, Daisy appeared in the doorway. Her bare feet touched the wooden porch, her face calm but resolute. "He did not take me," she said clearly. "I went with him." The director frowned. "Miss Kensington, you are unwell. Please, come with us so we can help you." "I am not sick," Daisy said, her voice steady. "I am just afraid. That is not the same thing." Jay turned toward her, surprised by her strength. For the first time, she did not look fragile. She looked free. One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to come with us." Jay nodded slowly. There was no point fighting. "Let me say goodbye," he said quietly. He walked back to Daisy, stopping just a few feet away. "You will be all right," he said softly. "I promise." She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You said that before," she whispered. He forced a smile. and I meant it both times. Tu. The officers led him toward the car, his hands behind his back. As the door closed, he looked through the window one last time. Daisy stood on the porch, clutching his jacket to her chest, watching as the cars pulled away. Inside the cruiser, Jay stared straight ahead. He felt no anger, only a heavy calm. What had happened was inevitable, but for the first time in years, he did not feel lost. He had done something that mattered, even if the world would never understand it. Back at the farmhouse, Daisy stayed where she was until the vehicles disappeared from view. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of birds through the fields. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, he kept his promise. For Jay and Daisy, the moment was over, but neither of them knew that what had begun as an escape was about to become the start of something far greater than either of them could imagine. The rain had returned by the time Jay's cell door closed behind him. The sound of it echoed faintly through the concrete walls, steady and cold. He sat on the edge of the small cot, staring at the cracks in the floor. It had been 3 days since the arrest. No lawyer visits, no calls, no one waiting for him outside. The silence felt heavy, but for the first time, it did not crush him. He had done something right, even if it had cost him his freedom. In another part of the city, Daisy sat alone in her hospital room. The walls were pale and bare, the windows locked. She held Jay's jacket tightly in her lap, folding it neatly over and over again like a ritual to keep herself calm. The other patients whispered to each other, but Daisy barely heard them. Every night she replayed the same moment in her mind, Jay standing on the porch, smiling at her as the officers led him away. His voice still echoed inside her. "You will be all right, I promise." Weeks passed. Jay worked in the prison workshop, repairing old furniture for the county office. He kept his head down, answered when spoken to, and counted the days. At night, when the lights went out, he thought about Daisy, her questions, her laughter, her way of seeing beauty in the ordinary. That memory had become his only comfort. Back at the hospital, Daisy had stopped speaking for a while. The doctors called it regression, but it was not that. She was simply waiting quietly, patiently, for proof that goodness did not disappear when people left. She refused to take her medication at first, until one of the nurses handed her a small note that had arrived by mail. The handwriting was clumsy but familiar. It said only 4 words, "Still keeping my promise." Tears slipped down Daisy's cheeks as she pressed the note against her chest. From that day, something changed in her. She began to draw again, small sketches of the lake, the farmhouse, the fireflies. The doctors noticed the improvement, calling it progress. But Daisy knew it was more than that. It was connection. Months later, Jay's probation hearing came. His public defender spoke quietly on his behalf, explaining how he had not harmed anyone, how he had turned himself in peacefully. The judge listened, tapping his pen, and finally sighed. "You have broken the rules," he said, "but maybe, for once, you broke them for the right reason." Jay was released under supervision 2 weeks later. When he stepped outside, the air smelled of rain again. He stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, breathing in the damp wind. He was free not in the way he once wanted, but in the way that mattered. That same evening, Daisy sat by her window as the rain tapped softly against the glass. She could not see beyond the hospital gates, but she felt something, a calm she could not explain, as if the world had begun to breathe with her again. In 2 separate places, they both looked toward the same sky, divided by distance but bound by the same promise. Neither of them knew what the future would bring, but for the first time neither was afraid of it. Several months passed, and the seasons began to turn. The hospital garden that had once been gray and empty was now filled with small green buds pushing through the soil. Daisy walked among them slowly each morning, her steps light, her gaze steady. She still wore Jay's jacket, though it was too large for her. The doctors said it helped her feel safe, but Daisy knew it was more than that. It reminded her of kindness, of the promise that someone out there believed in her humanity. Her therapy sessions had changed. She spoke more often now, not just about her fears, but about hope. When her doctor asked what had caused the improvement, Daisy simply said, "Someone saw me as a person." The doctor smiled politely, assuming it was a metaphor, but Daisy meant every word. Meanwhile, Jay had been released from the halfway house. He had taken a job at a mechanic's garage in town, the same one his father used to take their car to when he was a boy. The work was hard, but it kept his hands steady and his mind clear. At night, he rented a small room above the shop, where he cooked his own meals and stayed out of trouble. For the first time in his life, quiet did not feel like punishment. Every week, Jay wrote a letter he never sent. He told Daisy about the new customers at the shop, about how the morning smelled like oil and coffee, about how the sky looked before rain. He did not know if she would ever read them, but somehow, writing her name kept him anchored. Then, one morning, an envelope arrived for him. It was thin, with careful handwriting that he recognized instantly. Inside was a single drawing, two figures sitting in a field under a sky filled with tiny dots of light. Underneath, she had written one sentence, "I am free now." Jay stared at the drawing for a long time before folding it gently and putting it in his wallet. He knew what it meant. Daisy had finally been discharged. She had healed enough to live outside those walls. A few days later, she stood at a podium in front of the hospital board, part of a small meeting to review her progress. When they asked her what she had learned, she said that healing is not about medicine alone. It is about being seen, being heard, and being loved for who you are. There was silence in the room, the kind that carries truth too strong for words. At the back of that same room, unnoticed at first, Jay stood quietly. He had come just to make sure she was truly free. When Daisy saw him, her voice caught for a moment, but she did not break. She finished her sentence calmly, her eyes locked on his. When the meeting ended, she walked toward him slowly. Neither spoke at first. The air between them was full of everything they had survived. Daisy smiled softly. "You kept your promise." Jay nodded, his voice low but sure. "And you kept yours. You found your way back." No music played, no applause followed. Only the quiet, steady heartbeat of two people who had finally learned that love, when honest and patient, can heal what fear once destroyed. The wind from the ocean carried a soft salt scent as Jay parked his old truck near the shore. Months had passed since he had last seen Daisy at the hospital hearing. Since then, he had settled into a quiet rhythm repairing cars during the day, walking along the beach at dusk and watching the tide roll in like a slow heartbeat. The world no longer felt heavy. It simply existed. And for the first time, Jay felt like he belonged to it again. He lived in a small cottage by the water, a place that needed repairs but offered peace. The walls were bare except for one thing, a single frame drawing. It was Daisy's, the one she had sent him with the words, "I am free now." He kept it above the fireplace as a reminder of what mattered most. That morning, the sky was pale blue and clear. Jay was fixing a loose window hinge when he heard the soft sound of footsteps on the wooden porch. At first, he thought it was the mail carrier. But when he opened the door, the world seemed to pause. Daisy stood there, barefoot as always. Her hair was longer, her face calmer, her eyes steady but shining with something familiar. That same quiet wonder she had carried the night she stepped out of her hospital room. She wore a simple sundress and carried a small canvas bag. For a moment, neither spoke. The sea breeze moved between them, carrying the sound of distant gulls. "Hello, Jay," she said softly. He stared at her, almost afraid that she was not real. "How did you find me?" She smiled. "You are not very hard to find. People talk about the mechanic who fixes everything but never leaves the coast." Jay let out a quiet laugh. "I guess that is me." Daisy looked past him into the cottage. "It looks peaceful." "It is," he said. "I did not think I would ever find peace again." She stepped closer, her bare feet brushing the wooden floorboards. "Maybe you were waiting for someone to share it with." For a long moment they stood there, the silence gentle but full of meaning. Jay finally asked, "Are you ready for the world now?" Daisy nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, because you showed me it was real." He smiled, a real smile this time. Not the one he wore to hide pain, but the kind that comes from acceptance. He reached out his hand. She took it, her fingers small but sure. Together, they walked down the short path that led to the beach. The sand was warm under their feet. The tide crept forward, curling around their toes before retreating again. Daisy looked out across the horizon. "It feels different out here," she said. Jay followed her gaze. "That is because this is what freedom feels like. Quiet, honest, simple." She turned to him, her expression full of peace. "Do you ever think about the hospital?" He nodded. "Sometimes, but not with regret. It is where we met. Maybe we had to be broken in that place so we could learn how to be whole somewhere else." The waves rose and fell in a calm rhythm, like the world breathing. Daisy squeezed his hand, and Jay looked at her, realizing that this, not the house, not the beach, not even redemption, was what coming home truly meant. As the sun dipped toward the water, the two of them stood side by side, barefoot in the sand, watching light melt into the horizon. There were no grand declarations, no promises left to make. They had already kept the only one that mattered to see each other, fully and without fear. And in that quiet moment, Surrounded by sea and sky, both Jay and Daisy finally understood that love does not fix what is broken. It simply reminds you that even the broken pieces still belong to the light.